Welcome back, everyone. I hope you're doing well. Today we are continuing our Caesar and Gaul series by Kings and Generals. We just saw him defeat the Helvetii. We saw him pretty much take down the Belgae. Now, he's crossed the Rhine even, so that's impressive. Very impressive, by the way. Now, he's going to take his legions and now try to cross the English Channel. Let's see what happens.
Overcome anything and do as he pleased. Caesar's next ambition, Britain, was once again a perfect propaganda target. The island was on the edge of the known world and rumoured to be a land of monsters and vast riches.
And that's the thing, like, they're not even sure what is there. It's folklore, it's fairy tale, it's exaggeration, it's so much more than that. They don't know, is this going to require every legion that Rome has? Does this require possibly excavators, and do we need to extract riches from unknown parts of the world? Like, we just don't know. So that's just the interesting part about this piece.
It had remained effectively untouched, and bringing it into Rome's sphere of influence would be a significant achievement. According to Caesar, the Britons had provided some of the Gallic tribes with the resources needed to make war. While this was a weak casus belli, Caesar was, by now, effectively doing what he wanted with little oversight. He began gathering intel from the Gallic merchants and sent a small reconnaissance force to the island, whilst he mustered the ships he used against the Veneti and prepared to cross with the 7th and 10th Legion. He set sail from modern Calais and safely made it across with most of his army, but his cavalry had been delayed by bad weather. The Romans saw the Britons had amassed along the White Cliffs of Dover in huge numbers, with infantry, cavalry and chariots, and with every warrior painted in fierce blue war paint. Caesar moved further down the coast in order to find a better place to land.
Question with this, because this was interesting, did they just have lookouts continuously, or did they get tips that Romans were on their way? It just feels so interesting that an army amassed on the cliffs of Dover. It almost feels like they were ready for them.
But was shadowed by the Britons' cavalry and chariots, who were easily able to keep pace with the fleet. When the Romans finally found a suitable beach, Caesar arranged his transport vessels into a long line with his warships on his flanks and ordered his men to disembark. As the transport vessels had deep keels, however, they were still some way from the shore, and the legions were forced to wade in waist-deep in water to try and reach the beach.
This is like D-Day 2,000 years ago. It's kind of weird. It's like D-Day 2,000 years ago.
The Britons saw their opportunity and attacked, firing missiles into the ranks of the legionnaires as they struggled through the water, weighed down by their armour. The Briton cavalry charged in and out of the Romans, the height advantage of being on horseback allowing them to fight much more effectively than the Romans stuck in the water. The legionaries were taking significant casualties, and seeing this, Caesar moved his shallower-keeled warships up the flanks so that his missile troops and ballistae could fire into the Britons' sides. Still, the legions were wavering, with some men not even being willing to get off their transports. It was not until an eagle-bearer of the 10th Legion leapt into the water and waded towards the Britons that the legions rallied and rejoined the battle in earnest.
Morale went through the roof right there.
The fighting was fierce and contested, with the Romans gathering to their nearest standards to try and maintain some form of cohesion, while Caesar used rowing boats to ferry men from the transports to areas where the Roman front line looked to be in danger. Finally, the Romans were able to push through the shallows onto the beach, where their organisation and heavy armour could come into play, at which point the Britons broke off and retreated. Caesar, without any cavalry, had no choice but to let them escape. We don't know the numbers of dead on either side, but being a contested landing, it's likely that the Roman losses were greater.
Probably.
Following the battle, the Romans established a camp on the beach, and the Britons sent delegates to sue for peace, probably to assess the Romans' purpose in the area. They were on home ground and could afford to wait to see what Caesar's next move would be, whereas Caesar, with no supply line, would be pressured to make the first move. Caesar accepted the peace, and the Britons sent a small number of hostages, promising more later. The cavalry that had been waylaid did try and cross once again to meet
Oh, I was about to say, where are we looking?
Caesar, but were caught in a storm and forced to turn back. This same storm damaged the ships that Caesar had anchored off the beach, demoralizing the Romans, who could no longer escape the island.
The boats are gone. Basically. You can still repair them. But now, you gotta forage, and you gotta fight your way out of this if you have to.
Salvaging what materials he could from the most damaged ships, Caesar began repairs. He sent one legion at a time to forage for food, whilst the others defended the camp on the beach. However, whilst one of the legions was out foraging, the camp watch reported seeing dust on the horizon moving their way. This, combined with the lack of the promised extra hostages, was enough to alert Caesar to what was happening. He gathered 2 cohorts and marched quickly to the legion's location. Whilst foraging, the legion had been ambushed. Scattered and focused on collecting food, the Britons had been able to kill a substantial number of them in the initial attack. The legion had managed to regain some level of discipline, snatching up their weapons, but they were surrounded by the British cavalry and chariots. British charioteers were trained to throw missiles from their chariots and then dismount to fight on foot, before hopping back on the chariot when the fighting got too hard in order to regroup. This gave them the staying power of infantry and mobility of cavalry, a tactic Caesar admired, but was now taking a heavy toll on the surrounded legion. Upon Caesar's arrival with his cohorts in formation, the cavalry and chariots retreated. The Britons had no desire to fight heavy infantry in formation in a pitched battle without their own infantry support, and allowed the legion to withdraw to camp with Caesar. However, bolstered by this success, the Britons amassed their full force of infantry, cavalry and chariots and marched on the camp.
I wonder how many... I don't hear numbers, but I wonder how many Britons there are in this army. And I'm just like, I'm ideating right now, mainly because I don't know, and I'm just curious. I'm wondering, like, is Britain's obviously not unified, so this is a tribe on Britain that has this army, or it could be multiple tribes that have unified to the south on the invaders. There's so many theories I have here, but I just don't know. I'm not sure if they'll tell us either, but if you guys do know, let me know.
Caesar drew out his legions to meet them. So far, he had been fighting in difficult circumstances, in water, in ambushes, against a highly mobile enemy. But this was an ideal situation for the Romans, where their formations and discipline could truly make a difference.
The shield wall.
The Britons charged, but in these conditions, the Romans had a significant advantage. Whilst the chariots and cavalry had proved highly effective against small groups of Roman infantry, with the legions in a cohesive line, they now had little effect. The Britons quickly caught on to this fact and disengaged, their chariots and cavalry leaving the battlefield. The Roman infantry was now able to surge forward and catch a portion of the Briton infantry, routing it completely. The Britons were excellent at hit-and-run tactics and ambushes, but in set-piece battles, the Romans were far superior.
I'm wondering, like, how many decades the Romans are putting the Britons back by way of this, because there's only so many men. There's only so many hunters and gatherers, and they're agriculturalists as well, probably. So there's only so many, and they're just getting wiped out. It's crazy.
Once again, the Britons sent a peace delegation, and Caesar, knowing that his options were limited, and that he did not have enough resources to carry out a full campaign, accepted, and then hastily withdrew from the island during the night. However, on his way back to Gaul, 2 ships were blown off course in a storm.
Seems like there's always a storm on the English Channel.
300 Romans were stranded and surrounded by a Belgae tribe, the Morini, who Caesar had only recently subjugated and were keen for spoils and revenge. The Romans were assailed from all sides with missiles in hit-and-run attacks against their small group.
I wonder if they thought they were being attacked, from the sea.
Caesar caught wind of this and gathered as much cavalry as he could to personally lead them to the men's rescue, managing to ride down the Gauls and save the Romans with only minimal casualties. Labienus would later be sent into the Belgae territory to winter there and reinforce Roman rule in the area. Neither the invasion of Britain nor this foray into Belgae territory were significant military achievements. However,
he's probably going to say it, but the fact that he crossed the Rhine, the fact that he crossed the Channel and was in Britain, creates Caesar as a legend at this point, because those are tasks I don't think any Roman has ever done either of those tasks.
They show why Caesar was so loved by his men. He was brave, achieving things no Roman had ever done before.
Exactly.
He was calm under pressure, and most importantly, he would lead from the front and showed that he cared for his soldiers and was prepared to risk his life to save them.
Yeah.
The Britain campaign had not achieved much for the Romans, but it did provide Caesar with crucial knowledge about the Britain's military, the climate, and the level of preparation that he would need to succeed, lessons he would learn from for next year. Moreover, the Roman public and Senate were amazed by his feat of crossing the Channel into unknown territories, and a full 20 days of Thanksgiving were declared to recognize his achievement.
Thanksgiving? They had Thanksgiving back then? He said Thanksgiving.
After dealing with some administrative matters in 54 BC, Caesar began planning a second campaign in Britain. Almost 600 transports and 28 warships were built, implementing Veneti shipbuilding techniques better suited to the rough seas. Caesar called on his Gallic allies and vassals and amassed 4,000 cavalry, including tribal leaders, once again bolstering his army and minimizing the risk of revolts in Gaul. He left half of his cavalry and 3 legions in Gaul and crossed with 5 legions and 2,000 cavalry, more than double his previous numbers.
Really good that he split that up right there. I'm not sure if anything happened while he was gone in the second trip, but if it did, it would have been put down by Labienus and the cavalry.
This was going to be a full invasion. Caesar landed at the same place as before, but this time he was unopposed. He quickly established a camp in the area and sent out scouts, who promptly brought back some local prisoners. They informed Caesar that a large army had actually gathered to oppose the landing, but had retreated upon seeing the size of Caesar's force. Leaving a legion at the camp, he immediately set out in search of the Briton army. The Romans marched through the night and were able to catch up to the Britons in a hill fort on the other side of a river. Although the Romans were tired, Caesar was determined to confront the Britons and began crossing. The Britons' cavalry and chariots rushed down from the high ground to harass the Romans as they crossed. Caesar's allied Gallic cavalry were experienced in fighting in such scenarios and proved their value, chasing off the Britons, who quickly retreated to the woods surrounding the fort.
So they have a full-on fort. That's pretty cool.
As the legions began their advance up the hill, they were harassed from the woods by the Britons, preventing them from making significant progress until the 12th Legion formed a testudo and were able to make a rudimentary rampart in order to move over the walls.
Is that testudo? It's visualized here, so that's like when they put all the shields together and lock almost in lockstep. They're moving towards the adversary, and there's basically little to no air between the arrows to go through. I'm guessing that's what that.
The Romans were now inside the fortifications, but the Britons were quick to escape the fort and retreated deeper into the woods. Considering the men had carried out a night march and battle, and that he did not know the terrain and whether any more Britons would be waiting for him, Caesar made camp for the night.
It's pretty easy. You get your...
The next day, word reached him that a storm in the night had again damaged his ships. Without the ships, Caesar would be at the mercy of the Britons, so he decided to prioritize overseeing their repairs. He commanded his army to reassemble and march back to the beach.
Oh, that's the River Thames, I just realized.
Upon arriving, he discovered that 40 ships were beyond repair, but the rest were salvageable. Caesar ordered that the ships be brought onto the beach, and a large wall was constructed encompassing the camp and the ships. He also sent word to Labienus to build more ships in Gaul. He then set off once again to find the Britons. They were in the same hill fort, but it was a larger force than before, under the command of Cassivellaunus, a tribal leader beyond the Thames, who was appointed the leader of a united coalition against the Romans.
That's what I asked earlier. Bunch of united tribes.
Caesar had marched past this fort, possibly not wanting to attack such a large and fortified enemy, instead attacking exposed villages to try and draw Cassivellaunus out. At the same time, his troops were constantly harassed by the Britons' cavalry and chariots fighting skirmishes with the Roman cavalry on the flanks, luring them into the forests before turning back to inflict significant casualties.
I bet you there had to have been some sort of migration eastward to Britain post-chariot invention, right? Or is it just not unilateral, but like, is it just like a symbiotic technological growth that these cultures had somehow without contact? Because if I'm not mistaken, chariots really came about with the Assyrians. I think that's about as far back as chariots go. I might mistake that, but given that context, I'm just probably not remembering that there was a migration that happened from the Indo-Europeans. Britain. I don't know why I'm talking about that, but it's just interesting because I don't know. I think of like Britain as like a echo chambered tribal environment until the Anglo-Saxons post-Roman.
The Britons seemingly allowed the Roman advanced party time to begin making a fort for the night. However, as construction began, the Britons attacked again. The Romans who were on guard were able to form a line to defend the site, but the fighting was brutal, with the Briton chariots darting in and out of the Roman formation. Caesar was forced to send a further 2 cohorts from the vanguard to quickly reinforce this line. The Romans were not used to the Briton style of fighting, particularly chariot hit-and-run tactics, drawing out the Roman infantry from formation who were too slow to catch them. At one point, the Britons were able to draw out a maniple far enough to create a gap, which they were able to exploit, punching through the Roman line and inflicting many casualties.
Dang.
It was not until the rest of the Roman army caught up that the Britons disengaged and retreated. Cassivellaunus was proving himself a cunning enemy.
I don't think Caesar wants to be here much longer.
Caesar marched to the Thames, towards Cassivellaunus's own territories, in an attempt to draw them out. Though he was able to find a position on the river where he could cross, the legions were once again harassed by Britons amassed on the other bank, who quickly retreated once the Romans were on dry land. Cassivellaunus then made the decision to dismiss the vast majority of his army except for 4,000 chariots, likely realizing that fighting a pitched battle against the Roman heavy infantry would be futile. A smaller force would serve him much better in a guerrilla war. It would be easier to hide, faster to move, and need fewer supplies to maintain. Given the fact that he knew the terrain and Caesar did not, this was a smart and calculated move. However, Cassivellaunus's previous wars with other Britons had made him many enemies, and his new guerrilla tactics were not popular with the Trinobantes, whose leader Cassivellaunus had previously killed. They sent envoys to Caesar, surrendering and promising hostages.
Dang. Just like that, defecting.
The Trinobantes were second in power only to Cassivellaunus himself, and without their support, numerous tribes followed suit, surrendering to Caesar. They also provided critical intel to Caesar, including the location of Cassivellaunus's capital. Caesar,
I'm guessing that's the circular oval,
marched there, another hill fort, burning all villages and fields on the way, and besieged it from both sides,
Dang!
once again hoping to draw the Briton leader into a direct confrontation. Cassivellaunus, however, did not take the bait. Although his guerrilla tactics were effective, they were taking a toll on the Britons, and the defenders within the capital quickly fled. Cassivellaunus realized he needed to gain a victory. Not wanting to fight Caesar directly though, he instead sent envoys to 4 allied kings in Kent, who launched an attack on the Roman camp on the beach in order to try and draw Caesar away from Cassivellaunus's land. However, the Roman fortifications were strong, and the force Caesar had left on the beach was easily able to repel the attack.
Wasn't expecting that actually, so that was really good. I guess he left enough back there.
Cassivellaunus was forced to sue for peace. Caesar readily accepted in exchange for hostages and tribute. Winter was closing in, and he had no desire to spend it in unknown hostile lands. The Romans returned to the beach and sailed back to Gaul. Overall, it is hard to see the invasion as an immense military victory.
Yeah.
Cassivellaunus had not been decisively defeated in battle nor captured, and the Romans maintained no presence in Britain. From the Briton standpoint, it was a strategic victory, having successfully pushed the Romans out of their lands.
You could say that.
Still.
Okay, well, that's what we'll stop here. Caesar went to Britain twice, and like I said before, like it seems like the Gallic cavalry definitely helped them in the second round. It seems like they were just going to continuously get outflanked and outmaneuvered, especially if they did not defect. The tribes did not defect; they would stay unified. Now, for their own, there would have been more bloodshed on their side, and they were seeing. You know, the writing was on the wall, especially in those early engagements, how many people they probably lost because, you know, disciplined, tactical Roman shield walls versus not that tactical, not that defensible Britons. It made sense. I also noticed there's Belgae. There's Belgae also in Britain. Is that a different Belgae? I see it. I'm wondering, is that a different Belgae? But I think Caesar, like the fact that Caesar was able to muster a huge invading force, land, understand that information will then be passed on to future emperors, way down the line. I know that. And then, of course, as we know, Rome goes all the way to the Picts up there in Scotland and the Highlands almost in a future date. So that's going to be interesting and fun to learn once we get to that point. But nevertheless, Caesar makes it back home to Gaul, home quote unquote. I'm guessing Labienus. He said it wrong and I said it wrong, and now I'm saying it wrong continuously. I think it's Labienus. Labienus and crew are going to be stationed in this area, and we're probably about to meet another fun, the unifier of the Gauls. I'm pretty sure that's, is it Vercingetorix? Vercingetorix? I think that's his name. We're about to see, but I'll see you guys there. I appreciate you guys so much for watching this one. I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.